All right, so we've got a full agenda today. We're first going to go over doing some simple explorations of our featured food item and connect to past experiences we may have related to it. Then we'll cover how to get ready to do hands-on cooking with kids. And once we're fully prepared, we will make our recipe. We'll then briefly cover the importance of cleaning up before serving and eating, and then we'll taste test our creation together. Finally, we'll briefly go over how you can build on what you learned today to make the other featured Turnip the Volume recipes that you can find in the online resource toolkit that you got access to when you signed up for Turnip the Volume. So we're going to have a lot of fun learning and doing again together today. And to get the most out of your time, we encouraged you to bring to this workshop, at the very least, a vegetable. Hopefully everyone has at least one vegetable, preferably a root vegetable, and even more preferably turnips. I brought my turnip. Then, if you've got them handy, a cutting board and a knife will take your experience to the next level today. If you've also got a bowl, a jar, some measuring cups and spoons, some vinegar, some sugar, salt, and pepper, you will be fully equipped to prepare some quick pickled turnips right along with us. If you don't have any or all of these materials, no worries. We're still very happy you joined us, and we promise you'll get a lot out of being here today. So, quick introductions. My name is Kimberly Kugler. I'm the Farm to School Coordinator at Georgia Organics. And to lead us through the good stuff today, we have Jenna Mobley, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hey y'all, I'm Jenna Mobley. Been a public school educator for probably a decade or so, and I am thrilled to be here today to talk about hands-on cooking. This one's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of hands-on sensory experiences that can happen inside a traditional classroom, like where I've taught for the past 10 years or so, or in the home, or in after school, or in any sort of pods that you might find yourself in. So the first thing we'd like to do is see who's here and what sort of settings that you're teaching in, so we can speak to those settings. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen, and please respond with the type of setting that you'll be teaching in this year. Also, I'm really interested this week to hear where everyone is calling in from. After you have responded to the poll, if you don't mind jumping into the chat box and letting us know where in Georgia or throughout the region you are located, so we can imagine all of the kids in all of these different geographic areas getting this type of education. All right, so we're about half and half again. We're about half virtual and half in person. And probably a good number of those virtual will be moving to in-person in the next couple of months, and a couple at home and in other settings as well. Great. So you will see today how I teach these lessons virtually. I'm teaching you just like I teach my kids when I teach them virtually right now. And of course, we'll talk about some ways that this can work in a classroom with 28 kindergartners or 22 eighth graders, wherever you find yourself. All right, and if you have not found that chat box, take a minute now to find it. This is great. We have Bartow, Augusta, Conyers, Gordon County, Columbus, Gwinnett, all over the place. Welcome to everyone that is here. All right. The last thing I'd like to do is see all of your faces, and this is helping us practice some of these Zoom mechanisms too, is if you could go to, I'm going to stop the share so we can go to the gallery view so we can see everyone. Yeah, and I'd love to see from everyone, how many years experience do you have teaching kids in any way, as a counselor, a babysitter, a parent, a teacher? If it's over 10, flash your 10 fingers. Show us on the screens Oh yeah, like everyone's flashing. This is great. Awesome. So there's so much experience in this room, and I would encourage you all to continue to use that chat box. You can use it when we ask questions like we did earlier, like where are you chiming in from? But then also, if I am sharing anything that did or didn't work for you, if you have any other ideas or any other questions, please feel free to jump into that chat box at any time. I am in no way the expert on this. I've tried hands-on cooking a lot of times. I've made a lot of mistakes, and hopefully I can help you learn from them. But I know that a lot of you have done a lot of these lessons, worked with kids in a lot of different settings, and might have a lot to share. So please feel free to jump in there. I get so much out of the chat. And in other webinars, I love the chat as much as I love the presenter most of the time. And that is recorded as well for these same reasons. Kimberly, I think you're on mute.
You're right. I'm sorry. Okay. So what is Farm to School? Farm to School is basically just getting some locally grown foods, cooking and tasting those locally grown foods, and learning about and through locally grown foods. So you may get your locally grown foods by purchasing them from a farmer you know, by growing them yourself. There are many ways. You can take your students on a field trip to a farm to meet the farmer, to see and learn about how that food came to be. We think that the best farm school programs include learning about and through local foods, eating those local foods, and engaging with your community around locally grown foods. Hands-on activities like cooking, taste testing, and gardening are fun ways for students to learn Georgia education standards, as well as the impact of food choices on their health, their community, and the local economy. So the key takeaways are that Farm to School is growing and or buying locally grown foods when possible to both feed and teach our students, and doing hands-on gardening, cooking, and food-based education.
And we do all of this for so many reasons. It increases this academic success when the kids are engaged in the work that they're doing. All kids get excited about food and being able to touch food and use new tools and taste things. And of course, by getting more familiar with different locally grown fruits and vegetables, they are becoming more prepared to try them and maybe like them and eat more of them, which is great for their physical health. A lot of our kids also need this sort of break from sitting in a desk and working in a workbook, and being able to interact with these different types of tools and use their fine motor and gross motor skills. And of course, with cooking especially, these are life skills that we're building so that our kids have the ability to feed themselves and feed and nurture their community as they grow older. One thing I think that's really special about food is that it brings us all together. We all have very unique experiences, personal experiences around food as part of our culture and our identities and our families. And then also, food is our common ground in this universal experience that we can have together. The first thing I wanted to do here is invite you to share in the chat box some of your food memories. What was something special, just really short and sweet? What is a special food to you? Maybe it's something that one of your caregivers used to make for you. Maybe it's a way that you used to celebrate a certain holiday. Maybe it's what you always like to have on your birthdays. Maybe it's somewhere you go every time you visit a certain place. Think about a food that is special to you personally, your family, and your culture. And if you don't mind sharing some of those ideas in the chat box. Mom's mac and cheese. I love all of those recipes from childhood. I feel like none of us ever forget those. Oh, and that act of strawberry picking with the family, that experience of doing that together. Making guacamole. Ooh, pierogies, yum. Baking cookies. Yeah, I love all the holiday celebrations. Oh, these are so sweet. You make them for your grandkids now. I hope you guys are all reading the chat. I can't wait to read more of those. so special and important to all of us, and it's so special to be able to share these experiences with our kids. So today, as part of the Turnip the Volume lesson series, we are going to dive into some of the different recipes that are available to you when you sign up for the Turnip the Volume resources. You can see that link there on the bottom if you have not been there yet. And that's what we're going to work through today so that you are prepared to lead one of these meaningful special experiences with your kids around turnips this month, where they'll remember that in October, the harvest of the month, our big celebration, we did this neat thing with this weird vegetable called turnips with their teacher. And then maybe they went home and prepared them for their family. So we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. And the way that we're going to structure today, as Kimberly mentioned earlier, is we're going to go through a lesson from beginning to end. I'm going to show you how I prepare to cook with the kids, and then what we do next, and then how we cook and what tools we use and how we clean up and how we taste. We're going to go step by step through this. So it will be as if I am teaching a virtual cooking class, but I'll also step back and sort of like pull behind the curtain here so you can see exactly what I'm doing and why as we go along. So as we prepare to cook, we always start with washing our hands, of course. It is important to have a visual for washing hands. We also, my kids have a song about washing their hands. The lyrics are on the next page here, but I'll sing it to you while you're looking here. It goes to the tune of row, row, row your boat. And here, I can pull it up for you. It goes, wash, wash, wash your hands, gotta get them clean. Every finger one by one and lather in between. And my kids do that 2 times so that they are washing their hands long enough, at least 2 times. Sometimes they like to play in the soap and the bubbles longer than that, and I have to pull them away from them. But that's always the important place to start. And another thing to note about washing hands that my kids have learned, and for us as adults, it's important for us to remember too, is that once our hands are clean, my kids put their hands up, like they call them surgeon hands, like I guess they watch it on TV, that they can't touch anything. They keep their hands up. They can't touch anything except tools and food, or it's ew. That's what my kids came up with, kind of rhymes. So they have to keep those hands up. And you know what? If they make a mistake and they accidentally touch their hair or their pencil or tuck their chair in with their hands, it's okay. No one's in trouble. We just go wash our hands again and do wash, wash, wash your hands, gotta get them clean. We do the whole thing again. And we do it as often as we need to make sure that our hands are clean when we're touching tools and food only. Another note about gloves here is I do sometimes use gloves. You can see me here in the picture on the right, but treat gloves the same way. So once you have your gloves on, you cannot touch anything but tools and food. I do not use gloves with my children because I teach 800 children a week, and that's a lot of gloves and not great for the environment. It also takes them half the class period to get their gloves on. So for my kids, we just do the washing hands song and we wash as often as we need to. You can use gloves, but just to note that if you do, make sure that you replace your gloves every time you touch something that is not tools or food. The other first next step is to review your recipe first. So with your class, read the recipe from the very top to the very bottom. And what you're looking for is ensuring that you have every single ingredient and every single tool. A third thing that I would be looking for as a teacher is any markers of time that we might need to look at. Like if something needs to sit or wait for a certain amount of time, that's something else. If it's not a recipe we can flow straight through in our lesson plan, that's something else that I would be looking at. Now, we're not going to do that in depth right now because we are going to go step by step through this while we cook. So don't worry, we'll take plenty of time to talk about this with this specific recipe as we go along. And then once everyone's hands are washed and once we've all checked out the recipe, we all have a moment of mindfulness together to bring our awareness to the task that we're about to be doing. So for my kids, what they say, and usually I have them fold their fingers for this so that they're not accidentally touching their hair or their chair or anything like that. They fold their fingers. And we say, cooking is creating a work of art to share. So it's giving this idea that we're going to make something beautiful and we get to share it with each other. The second one is we will cook with a relaxed body and a focused mind. So this brings this energy together of how we are going to do this task. Oftentimes the kids are very, very excited because there's all sorts of new food out and they love food and there's tools and they're all colorful and they're all stacked up and they're about to come to their table and they're going to get to use these tools and make this thing and they're going to get to eat something. And it's hard to bring that energy back down to a place where we can safely use tools together and where we can create something beautiful together. The next step is that we'll explore this featured produce together. So you can see here on the screen, the featured produce for this week, and of course this whole month, is turnips. No big surprise. But with all recipes, I like to talk to kids in terms of what our featured produce is today, but also what the big idea is. And one of the big ideas I would tell my kids about quick pickling is today we're doing turnips. I'm so excited to try turnips with you. But everything we do with our turnips today, you could also try with carrots or red onions or okra or radishes or any of these other things. Today we're doing turnips, but think about all the other things you can do. So you can have this as you cook, we're making a specific recipe in a specific way, but also open their minds to the creativity of where it could go from there. Now, we talked about in the very first webinar, if you missed that one, we could go back and watch that one to see all of the different ways that we really take our time when we introduce a new vegetable to connect kids to that vegetable. There are all sorts of different ways to do it that cover all these different standards that you can discuss with kids. And two of the ones that I pulled out for today, just as a reminder, but these are also covered in that first webinar, are how to connect with kids' past experiences. And so these type of questions, when you hold up this interesting new looking vegetable, are like, what do you think this looks like? Does it look like anything you've seen before? Maybe have you seen another variety? And if you can even show different varieties of that vegetable, and this will get the kids thinking. This is not an opportunity for yes or no answers or right or wrong answers. It's not a quiz. It's more of this idea of inviting their brains to activate their prior knowledge of what they've experienced before and connect it to what they're about to do now. So if you get comments, either in the chat box virtually or in your circle in person, if you get comments that are like, oh, it kind of looks like a radish. The answer is yes, it does kind of look like a radish. Isn't that neat? Or it is red, just like an apple. That's great. Isn't that neat? All of these ideas are just connecting to these prior experiences. They do not have to be correct. It's just inviting those conversations. And then going a little further of where do you think you've seen it before? Did you think you saw it in the garden or in a restaurant, in the school cafeteria, in your home kitchen? Any of those ideas. And then it's time to cook. All right. So our first step with almost any recipe is washing. And this is something that's really fun for our kids to be involved in. Here are some of the different tools you may want to have handy for washing. So for washing, remember that their hands are a great tool for a lot of things, like fruits are very easy to do by hand. You can also use a colander for something like fruits. For leafy greens, you could do it with your hands and with a colander, but you could also get this specialized tool called a salad spinner, where the greens go inside and you pull the crank and it spins those greens to clean them. For root vegetables, like we're doing today, you can use a toothbrush. So I'll show you how I do this with my kids. Let's stop the share here. If you are not on speaker view, now is the time to go back to speaker view so you can see what's on my screen here. And I'll show you how I wash these with kids. My desk is a little messier than normal because there are so many fun materials for today. Now with kids, oftentimes this is a job for only one student at a time because there may only be one sink, or you can only take one or two kids to the restroom at a time to use the bathroom sink, something like that. But I have found that it works well to have just tubs of water. I have a lot of these recycled or Rubbermaid here so that they can dip their vegetable. And then we use little toothbrushes like this. This is just a little kid's toothbrush. And they can brush their root vegetable just like this. Now, this would only be the start of the task. This vegetable will still need a rinse because it's continuing to go back into the same water. But this is an example of a task that is not necessarily efficient, but does keep all of your kids busy They all have their own water. They all have their own toothbrush, and they're all very busy doing this little task of washing their root vegetable. And then you can stick them all in the colander and run them under the sink quickly. The idea being that every kid had something to do and felt like they had a meaningful task as you were washing all of the vegetables. We'll go back to the screen share to show you what we'll do next. The next step in the recipe is to slice our vegetable. Now, there's lots of different ways to slice the vegetable and lots of different tools that you could use. And it's important that whatever you decide, you model for the kids first. So I'm going to walk you through a lot of the different options that you could use for slicing or cutting a vegetable, and then which one I would do for this recipe. Now, here on this chart, I have the cutting tools, and actually these are like cutting, juicing, pressing, crushing tools, all of those combined. And I have them organized by the ones that kids can use independently, which ones they can use with a little bit of supervision, and which ones to use with caution. Now, independently, any of my kids at almost any age can use their hands to tear apart different vegetables. They can use juicers or garlic pressers, a mortar and pestle, anything like that that does not have a blade. They can use that independently to juice or press or crush or tear, any of those verbs. Also, oftentimes, especially when they're kindergarten and above, they can use scissors. Scissors are great, especially for a lot of herbs or stems or green onions. And so we have just a set of regular old scissors, but they are our set of culinary scissors that get antibacterial wiped every single time. And those are a great kitchen tool also. That is all before you ever need to worry about using a knife. We are going to talk about using a knife today, but all of those are a way for kids to get started and have a meaningful job. Now, the reason I put the grater, the peeler, maybe a mandolin slicer, all in this area of with caution, is that these blades are harder to tell that they are blades. And many of my kids over the past couple of years have not treated them with as much respect and have not seen them as serious as they do their knife. When they get a knife, they take it very seriously. They know it's a big deal and they respect that tool. But the grater or the peeler, I think, are surprisingly dangerous to use. There are ways to do it safely. With a grater, you could have the kids hold the carrot with a towel so that they can grate down the carrot. You can also put a mark on the carrot of how far down they can grate. That's a couple inches away from the end. So they can only go up to there and they have to hold it with the carrot so they can't get their fingers. You know, there are ways to do all of these things safely. But I do want to just bring notice to the fact that those ones are hidden blades. They're not as obvious blades, and that they can be more dangerous for kids. So use those with caution and with a lot of adult supervision if you do. That is my experience, but I would love to hear in the chat box any other ideas of tools that you use with kids, what works well and what doesn't work well. Maybe some others that you don't see pictured yet here, like the mortar and pestle I don't have a picture of yet here, or like a spiralizer is another cool tool that I don't have on here. There's probably tons of others, so please chime in. This is all sort of trial and error, and these are just ideas from my trials and errors. I want to give you a couple of pictures and examples of how we use some of these common tools. First of all, for hands are really good for doing things like tearing apart herbs. Like really, that is the best tool, not just the safest. It's actually the best tool for like getting the leaves off of cilantro or pulling the ends off of peas. I don't know if you did that when you were a kid, but that was always my job, is snapping the green beans to get the ends off. Or you can see here, even broccoli can be torn apart with hands, even with some of our littlest hands. Scissors are great for something like green onions. And we're actually going to use scissors today for the ends of our turnips. So I will show you how here. Again, make sure you are on speaker view. So we have our turnips here. And right now our turnips have the turnip root and the turnip greens. Now, of course, we can also eat the greens. So we don't want to compost. We might not necessarily want to compost these, but we do want to get just the root off so that we can cook right now with just the root. Scissors is the best tool to cut through these stems. And this is a test that the kids can do safely with the scissors. Now these greens you can put aside to make turnip greens later. You could also put them in your compost bin. But then you have gotten just your turnip, so you're ready to use another slicing tool to cut up your turnip. Let's take a look at the slicing tools that we'll use. So some of our favorites you can see up here are nylon knives and wavy cutters. These are great because they are not sharp to the touch, but they can still cut through even the hardest root vegetables. Even in my own personal kitchen, I use a wavy cutter to cut up like sweet potatoes and carrots because it is very efficient. And with just a little bit of force, it can cut through some of those different things. So let's show you some of the safety precautions when you're using wavy cutters or the nylon knives with your kids. So there is this chart that I'm showing you here of all of these different safety measures for kids. I'm going to turn the screen share off so I can show you how I model this for my students, but I want you to know that this chart is here with all of these same ideas. So you do not have to write down notes vigorously. You will get this with this chart. For now, we'll turn off the screen share so you can see how I would teach my kids how to use the wavy cutter. Now, the first thing is that every child that will be cutting has their own cutting board, their own home base. And I like for only one child to be at each cutting board. This is something I tried differently every different time. I used to have 2 kids at the cutting board because I thought they could be accountable and take turns. But I have learned that idle hands is when kids get in trouble. So 1 student to 1 cutting board, either sitting or standing, but in a way that they can be in control of their body and they know where their boundaries and their spaces are. Now this home base or this cutting board is where the knife or the wavy cutter is delivered. I am the only one that transports this knife and I put it right on the cutting board. Now we go through with our kids every time. We say, can your knife go on the table? No. Can it go on your lap? No. Can it go on your computer? No. Where does the knife go? On the cutting board, on home base. You use the knife and you put it back on your home base. Now, as a teacher, that's great for me because I have eyes on where every single knife is, no matter what. And that small group with however many cutting boards you feel comfortable having in your small group, those knives are always on the cutting board, either idle or in use, but always on the cutting board. And then my kids learn about where they're allowed to touch on the knife and the different parts of this tool. So my kids know that they can only touch the handle. I really like that on this knife, there is a color associated so that if they forget that vocabulary, they still know the color. You can only touch the green. And in fact, I have wavy cutters that match the same way. I on purpose bought these so that on both of them, for my kids, I can say green means go. You can only touch the green. We say it over and over and over and over again. And this is the handle, you can only touch the green. For some of mine that don't match, I just wrap them in electrical tape so they match, but just another little visual cue you can give your kids. Now, they know that they can touch the handle. So again, we do this modeling where we say, can you touch here? No. Can you touch here? No. Can you touch it? No, you cannot touch there. Can you touch there? No, you only touch the handle. We practice that over and over and over again. And then we learn how to use it. So one of the things I think kids see on TV is this sort of like, that sort of thing with knives. That is not what we're doing. Sometimes it's helpful to say that up front. Other times it's just good to know that you might hear that. Luckily, as a teacher, there's a really good audible clue that something's going wrong because you should not ever hear that sort of noise on your cutting board. So what we teach the kids is that the motion is low and slow. And because this is a serrated knife, you can see, they need to do a sawing motion. So we also teach claw and saw. They claw their vegetable and then they saw across to cut their vegetable. That is one of the cuts that we use is this claw and saw. I can show you what that looks like. Just like that. Now, one of the other ideas that we want to make sure our kids know, and for us as teachers to think about our prep, is that it is hard to cut round vegetables. So oftentimes, as a teacher, I do all of that you just saw before the kids come, because then the kids have a flat surface that they can put down. So it will not roll, it will not go anywhere, They have a flat surface down where they can cut the rest of their turnip. Now, another one of the cuts besides the claw and saw is the bridge cut. So with the bridge cut, there we go. You make your bridge like that, and the cut goes in between. Now, again, we're doing low and slow. Again, we have a claw and we're sawing because it's a serrated knife, and we get all the way to the bottom, if you could see like that. Now we have flat surfaces again. So we put it on the biggest flat surface, not the smallest flat surface. That's not going to be the best way to cut it. We put it on the biggest flat surface, and the kids can cut it again. They can do a little bitty claw and saw, just like that. Little bitty claw and saw, low and slow, just like that. And they have cut their turnip now into quarters. And of course, the knife goes right back down. Now, all of my kids wash all of their own cutting boards, everything that we use, but I do not allow them to transport the knives or wash the knives. All of these things that I put in place may seem really strict, and your kids might not need all of these barriers. Your kids might be able to handle learning how to transport their own knives, and they might be able to learn how to wash them. But I wanted to show you, for when I walk into a classroom of kids that I don't know, that I haven't been working with for a little while, I wanted to show you all of the parameters and structure that I could put around this so that it can be as safe as possible. And then for you, you can decide what your kids need to do this safely. Now, the only other idea on here that I wanted to point out is that I really like to have a compost bag handy so that the cutting board, the home base, the workspace does not get cluttered up. So we have one place to put all of the things that we are discarding, and a different place where we put all of the turnips or whatever it is that are ready to go, so that our work area is clean. That's another quick safety precaution for kids. Now, of course, there's a couple of standards in here. I'm a teacher, so I really can't keep myself from talking about standards. But there is a lot of the geometry standards of 3D shapes and 2D shapes. Also fractions, like we talked about. I just modeled for my kids in my virtual classroom, or my kids in person, how to cut their turnip and how to cut it into quarters. So of course, there's a lot of math in here too. Let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 turnips. If I cut them into quarters, how many turnips pieces will I have? 4 times 4 is 16. You know, there's tons of math in here that you can do with your kids. Also, for science standards, think of all of these tools as different simple machines. These are all just combinations of wedges and levers, and this is one of the 4th grade standards that is really fun to teach when we talk about the ways that tools help us. You can think about them in terms of simple machines. Okay, let's get to the fun part. We are going to make a brine for our turnips. Now, in this recipe, we are making some quick pickled turnips, which means we need a brine or some liquid to soak them in. But also think about, there's all sorts of other quick recipes you could do with your kids. You could just eat the turnips raw, just like this. And we did a raw taste test in the very first webinar, if you want to go back and watch that and how we did it. You also, at this point, could work with your kids to make a dressing or a dip, something just to simply dip the raw turnips in. And those recipes are really fun for kids to do together. Today, we're going a step further and we're going to make a brine, which is just like, I call it a bath because it's easy for my kids to understand. We're going to make a bath for our turnips to soak in and pick up some flavor. And we have here on the recipe where you can see all of our ingredients of what will be in this brine and all of these that we are going to add together. But I wanted to show you this flavor star as well, because this is why. And I really like with a recipe, being able to take a moment and talk with the kids. You know, we talked about earlier, like, here's a specific recipe, but here's the big idea that you can apply to other vegetables. Well, same thing here. It's like, here's a specific recipe, but why does that work? Why did this chef think that we should combine this rice wine vinegar with this sugar, with this ginger, with this black pepper? Well, here's the reason why. And this flavor star is the reason why for all sorts of dishes, for even trail mix that kids have tasted before. The best trail mix is always the one that's a little bit of salty and a little bit of sweet and a little bit of spicy, right? And maybe a little bit of bitter dark chocolate in there too. This flavor star is the reason why for a lot of the dips and a lot of the dressings that you can make too. So if we're looking at this flavor star, this brine that we are creating together has rice wine vinegar as the base. That is a little sour, and rice wine vinegar specifically is a little sweet, a little sweetness with sugar, a little spicy with the pepper, and then this ginger as well. And to get this to this sort of big idea, here is what a brine recipe looks like. So this is something you could print out for the kids to come up with their own ideas. So for a brine, typically you would want 1 cup of some sort of vinegar to 1 cup of water. You could do red vinegar, white vinegar. I love apple cider vinegar, rice vinegar, any of those work. Kids can choose, they can be creative. And it's just 1 part vinegar to 1 part water. Those are easy ratio and proportions for them to do, or easy measurements to do if you're using measuring cups. Then you can add 1 tablespoon of salty, 1 tablespoon of sweet. Really easy to remember. You know, for salty, typically I just use salt. And for sweet, I typically use honey, although this recipe has sugar. So either of those work. This gets our basic brine down. Now I do want to mention here, I'm going to turn off the share so you can see the dry salting method, or the dry salting method that is shown in this recipe. So in this recipe, it shared that you would take the turnips and put the salt in and let them all sit. And what would happen, let's see if you can see here, is all of that water would come out. Show me a thumbs up if you can see that water. It's hard for me to, oh good, I'm so glad you can see it. Okay, all of that water comes out of the turnips when you let them sit. And this has only been sitting for about 30 minutes. And so what you would do with this is you could drain that water off, and then you have these turnips that have lost a lot of water and have a lot of room to put some other flavor in. They also are a little salty already, so you don't need to add more salt in. That is one method you could do. That is not necessary, and actually oftentimes for my kids, we don't have time to do that because my class period is so short, so we can't necessarily like soak turnips for 30 minutes before we pickle them. But you can do that. That's a really fun way to do it. And then with that water, you'll just discard the water and your turnips will be ready to go. So that's another quick way to do that salty part, but you probably still want to balance it with that sweet in your brine. And then, this is sort of the fun part, is you can add your spices to your brine. So for ours, we had pepper. That's what we were using, and that's a great way to do spicy. But there's all sorts of other things that you can do. I also really like mustard seed is one of my favorite things to put into in any of our quick pickles. You can also add herbs, which are more like aromatics to your pickles. Any of these work. Now, one of the big things to keep in mind when you're talking spices, though, is the difference between ground and whole spices. So if you can see me here, we have ground pepper, which if we added this, we would only do about 1 teaspoon. But if we were going to soak our peppercorns, we would add about 2 teaspoons. Because if you think about it, the flavor is so much more concentrated in here than it is in here. One of the other fun things that the kids can do, a great task for them, is using a mortar and pestle to crush up some of their spices. So you can see, you can maybe see those whole peppercorns in there. And then they can just smash them and smash them and smash them until they are crushed up. That is a great task for kids that, again, does not use blades, but uses a lot of force and energy so that they can make that crushed pepper to add to their brine. So let's share the screen here so we can actually make this together.
Jenna, we had a quick question.
Yeah.
Can you use any type of salt?
That's a great question. There is an entire book about all the different types of salts that you can use for all the different types of things. And it's called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. It's great. But for my cooking kitchen with my kids, we just use typical sea salt. We get the fine ground sea salt because it is something that we can use for everything. And we don't use a lot of salt. We just use a pinch here and there. But because I'm a classroom teacher on a budget, I get one type of salt and we use it for everything. Anyone else that has ideas about salt that would be great for this, please enter them into the chat box. Because if I didn't mention it before, I am an educator and not a chef. And so this may not be the way to make quick pickles, but it's what works for me and what works for my kids with our limited budget here. Okay, so if you have your ingredients, what we will do next here, let's see if I should turn off my screen share so I can show you. So we're going to do, there we go. Here is our jar. And in our jar, we can put these raw turnips. We could also put these turnips that have been soaking. These ones will have a little bit more flavor, but all of them will be good. There we go. And we are going to do about a cup of rice vinegar. Again, any sort of vinegar, actually half a cup of the rice vinegar. Any sort of vinegar will work on here. If I have children, I leave that cap on, but when it's just me, I take the cap off because it's way faster. That's an important thing to remember with kids is how you want them to be interacting with the ingredients. I love these measuring cups because they have little spouts. There's the rice vinegar. We could do just a little bit of sugar or honey. One little teaspoon of sugar. And let's do some of those black peppercorns that I was smashing. Yeah, that looks good. Typically want to pour the spices into your hand before you pour them into anything, so you don't overdo it. There we go. So we have our salty in the water. We have our sugar for our sweet. We have our black peppers for our spicy. We have a little bit of that sour with our rice vinegar. And that is all we need to do for this recipe. And put the jar on really tight. Now for this, typically, it would sit in the refrigerator for at least an hour or overnight or for a week. I often let the kids kind of swirl it around and get all those flavors in there. And we just let it sit as long as we can. Because, at shortest, it'll taste mostly like a raw turnip with a little bit of flavor. And at best, it'll taste like a raw turnip with a lot of flavor. So that is the only determining factor here when you think about the amount of time that you have. So while that's sitting with its vinegar and its sugar and its salty and its black pepper. Ooh, and I almost forgot the ginger. Actually, I'm gonna turn off my screen share one more time so you guys can see the ginger. The trick with ginger is that this is an adult task, I think. Ginger is very tricky to peel and it's tricky to slice and it is hard to do with, I tried it this morning with a wavy cutter and with this nylon knife. This is very hard to do. So this is an adult task, but when I use a real knife to do it, I got these little slices like this. And ginger is a really nice addition to your pickles if you have the time to do that prep on your own. You also can buy ginger slices in a jar at the grocery store if you really like that taste and want to add it back in. So I'm going to add ginger into mine so that that can sit until we do our quick taste test. All right. Here we come back to our flavor star. Of course, these are other tools that we can use, our measuring tools, having both measuring cups and measuring spoons. Because remember, for our brine, we use 1 cup of water and 1 cup of vinegar. But for our spices, we either use 1 teaspoon or 2 teaspoons, depending if they are ground or whole. And for our salty and sweet, we use 1 tablespoon and 1 tablespoon. So it's nice to have all of these. So you can have a large amount of your liquids and a small amount of your different spices. Now, a quick note on giving directions to kids. I think you've probably picked up on the amount of modeling that I do for kids before they ever do the task, and turning the screen share off so you can see exactly what I'm doing, see how I claw and saw it, see what a quarter a turnip looks like. But also think about the language that you use when giving directions. So I put these side by side because recipes are oftentimes very wordy. And even the ones that aren't that wordy can still be a lot for our English language learners and for any of our younger learners that are learning the language. And these are all new tasks for kids. So think about ways that as a teacher, you can simplify each task one by one to what is the verb and what is the tool and what is the ingredient. So first, we are going to wash the turnips with the colander so that all of your kids can think, okay, or maybe they can look at the word wall that you have up on your classroom wall with all of the kitchen nouns on it. Say, colander. Okay, there's the colander, and I'm going to wash it. Got it. And when that step is completely done, then go to the next step. We are going to slice the turnips with the nylon knife, keeping it very simple and only giving that one task at a time, not just for our English learners, but so that every one of our learners knows exactly what to do and can focus on that one and only task with that relaxed body and focused mind, like we talked about at the beginning. Or next, we are going to use the measuring spoons to measure our spices and ingredients. Think about the way that you're giving instructions and how you can simplify it for kids. What is the verb? What is the noun? And how can I model that so that kids can follow? Only one step at a time. Now, before we taste our pickled turnips, we of course need to clean up and serve. So as the Edible Schoolyard says, beauty is the language of care. And I think it's important to mention that not only have we, at the beginning, we talked about our mindfulness, about this is something we are creating a work of art to share. This is something we care about. It is something beautiful, but also part of the work of art is our table and our setting and the fact that we're all together. And so taking a second to wash all of the tools, except for the nylon knives, of course, to put away all of the compost, to wipe down the tables, clean up all the ingredients, and get the setting so that kids are tasting not only what's in their mouth, but the entire experience, this beautiful, clean community experience together. I think it's worth taking time to do that. And then, of course, thinking of how are you going to serve it? I cannot tell you guys how many times I have taught these great recipes and we get to the end and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess just give me your hand, didn't have anything ready, didn't think about how I was going to serve it. And hands do work. Hands are great plates and fingers are great forks. I tell my kids that all the time. And then we just wash our plate and our fork, our hands. But also think about if you have the ability to wash dishes pretty easily, how you can use reusable plates and utensils, or maybe compostable plates and utensils. With these quick pickles, I'll show you how I do them with my kids, is I just serve them with a fork. I'm the one that digs them out with a fork, and I put them right into their hands. That's it. And yes, their hands get some vinegar on them, and that's okay. That's their plate, and this is the quickest and easiest way for them to do it. Remember, these hands are already washed, or they could be washed again if they help with cleanup tasks. And this can be the way that they can serve them. Not touching their hand, of course. You are letting it go before it touches their hand because that fork is going right back in to continue to serve those. Just quick and easy ways to get that food to the children. And of course, if you can do something more beautiful or do some more plating, that's always a great extra step too. And then this preparing to taste, we did a lot of this in our first webinar, but just to roll through quickly, is of course, when we have a new dish, we want to think about what it looks like, what it smells like. We want to talk about how brave we are for trying something brand new and how we know that it's scary to try something brand new, but we know that they can do it. If our kids are feeling nervous, we can encourage them to just touch it. And if they'll just make their plate and put their turnip in their plate, that's really great. They're doing a big step out of their comfort zone. Maybe if they'll do that, they'll smell it a little bit. Maybe if they'll do that, they'll just touch their tongue to it, just for a second. And if they'll touch their tongue to it, maybe they'll take a teeny tiny little bite. And we celebrate every single step along the way. Every single one, because all of them take a lot of courage. All of them require them to be brave and do something new and adventurous. And we want to celebrate and encourage that. You can see here, they have a little sticker that says that they tasted it. Something to remember is that even if they just tasted a teeny tiny little bit, they get a sticker. And it's okay if they don't want the rest of their turnip. It can go in the compost and go back into the soil and continue that cycle of life. We're just so proud of them for trying it. And of course, sometimes we want to share with our kids like why we would try it. Besides the fact that we worked hard with our relaxed body and our focused mind to create this work of art that all of us would share, we also are supporting our neighbors, our farmers that grew that. We are also caring for our earth by supporting the farmers that care for the earth, and we're nourishing our bodies. So I did want to go back to our contemplations real fast before we eat. We'll say them quickly together. You can make sure that you are on mute. And here they come. The first one is, this food is a gift of the whole universe. The earth, the sky, the rain, and the sun. And then as you're still looking at your turnip, we can say together, as we sit around this table, let's give thanks as we are able to all the farmers we'll someday meet that helped grow this food we eat. And the last one before we taste, this food gives us the energy to be happy, healthy, loving, and understanding. And then it's time to taste. Now, of course, with your dishes, we can talk about their opinions, whether they liked them or didn't care for them. We can talk about how the taste was and how the texture was. But specifically, what we want to talk about when we are doing cooking, when we're creating dishes, is how they would adjust the taste next time they did it. If you like it spicier, what would you add to it to make it spicier? Maybe red pepper flakes. If you wanted it a little sweeter, what would you add to it next time to make it sweeter? Maybe honey. So it's going through this sort of creativity of what did you like or not like about the dish and how would you do it differently next time? Same thing with texture, is what did you like or not like about the texture? If you didn't like the turnips quartered, maybe you would like them grated. So here's another example of some of the recipes, speaking of different textures. In the Turnip the Volume recipes, you have this recipe for turnip and carrot slaw. Okay, a slaw is basically just pickles. It's just a salad. It's just pickles in a bath. It's the same sort of idea. But we're just gonna grate up those vegetables, grate up those turnips, maybe also grate up some carrots and some green onions. But then we're gonna put those in a vinegar, like an apple cider vinegar, and mix them around with some spices, and now you have a slaw. Here are some other recipes you can try. If you have access to a stovetop, you could do these glazed turnips, where you're sauteing the turnip roots, or here's a way to use those turnip greens, stewed turnip greens. If you have access to an oven, you could do roasted turnips. Those are delicious and kids love them. Anything that feels like a French fry, kids really go for. Roasted turnips are great. And in our Turnip the Volume resources, you could even go a step further and take those roasted turnips that you just finished roasting and turn them into a hummus. Again, kids love dips and dressings, so this would be a really fun dip or dressing for them to use. Now, I know that was a lot of information in one very short session, but I'd love to open the chat box now and hear what you're thinking about doing this type of work with your kids. What do you think with maybe this recipe or any of the other ones? Do you think your kids would like it? Do you think they could do it? Is there any step along the way of creating the brine or cutting the turnips that you think your kids wouldn't be able to do, or that you're worried about, that you think, I don't know about this one student doing this one task? Jump into that chat if you have any ideas, and let's answer each other's questions about how we could make quick pickled turnips work for our kids.
Jenna, Crystal asked if you find that kids typically like what they eat after they cook.
Almost always. I'm not sure that the kids would always pick up a full side serving of it or necessarily go home and ask them to make a huge dish that they'll eat for the rest of the week. But the kids always appreciate the experience, I think, particularly because they only have this one itty bitty little piece that they have the taste. There's very little pressure. They put a lot into, maybe they even grew that turnip and they put a lot into doing that together, and they're very proud of themselves for doing a task that is normally only for adults. They used knives and they did all this. And so they always appreciate the experience of doing it. They almost always like what we taste. Kids love pickles. This is sort of like an easy win. And they love spicy food. Like that's always an easy win. They love dips and dressing. That's an easy win. There are some that are a little bit trickier, but I will say that the kids enjoy the experience. Even if they wouldn't necessarily go home and say, oh, Mom, please make these for me. I want to have them every dinner for the rest of the week.
We got a couple other questions. Arvinda asked if it's hard for children to cut the turnip. Hers had a little bit of trouble. And Edna, related to that question, says that her 3-year-olds would probably have trouble cutting the turnip. Do you have?
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned this. One of the specific things about turnips that I ensure is that I get small Hawkeye turnips. These very small white turnips are much softer and easier to cut for the kids with the wavy cutters. I have certainly gone to the farmer's market and gotten turnips that were huge in the size of baseballs that were so hard for me to even cut with my knife at home. Very hard and very tough. What you really want to be looking for are these tender turnips that have not been in the ground for months and months. These tender, smaller Hawkeye turnips are really great ones for the kids to try to cut. But you're absolutely right. Not every kid is going to be able to cut through every turnip with the tools I just showed you. One strategy, if you do get those really big turnips, I do always like to leave one hole so the kids can see what it looks like whole. But you can also slice it into, with your real knife, you can slice it into smaller, thinner pieces. So you have just rounds, and then let the kids use the wavy cutter to just punch through the rounds, like the thin sliced rounds of turnips. That is one way that can work. But I'm glad you brought that up because there are some hard turnips out there, and we want this to be fun for kids. We do not want it to be frustrating. Definitely test it out ahead of time. Make sure that they can cut the vegetables with the tools that you give them so that they can feel successful and they can feel like they contributed.
And
sorry, we'll continue to answer questions, but I just want to quickly say we're going to launch a poll since it's 4 o'clock. We're going to launch a poll, and we'd love to hear how you're feeling about this recipe specifically. Of course, hands-on cooking with kids is this huge, vast topic, and it's so hard in so many different ways with so many different kids and so many different tools. But for this version of doing some sort of quick pickle with kids, with turnips, letting them cut it, letting them measure some ingredients, let us know in the poll here how you're feeling about carrying this out with some kids. All right, Kimberly, you want to share some more questions? I just want to make sure we got that poll up since we were getting close to the end.
I just wanted to let you know that Lisa McKinney had suggested that if your kids are too little to cut or they can't cut, they can mix the brine and shake the vegetables. You know, they can do some of those hands-on tasks that don't involve cutting.
Yes, absolutely. And that's part of looking at a recipe too, is deciding which parts of the recipe will be hands-on for the kids and which parts will be a chef demonstration for the kids, where all the kids will just be watching you do something like cutting the turnips. And then the kids get back involved when it's time to do mixing the brine. You don't need to cut out an entire recipe because there's a part kids can't do. Just think about how you can do that one part where kids can watch and they can be involved in the rest of it. That totally works. Thank you for sharing that, Kimberly.
Great. So really quickly, I'm going to put into the chat a link to an evaluation survey that we would really appreciate if you could fill out today or at your convenience. It will also come in a follow-up email we're going to send. Should we push on?
Yeah, let's share our upcoming webinars so they know what's next.
Cool. All right. So heads up of what's on the Turnip the Volume weekly webinar menu next week. So for our last Wednesday of October Farm to School Month, we're going to have 2 workshops back to back. One for teachers of our youngest learners. First, farm to school activities for children ages 2 to 5, followed at 4 o'clock by one for teachers of our older students in grades 6 through 12, turnip taste tests and preservation methods. And that's what we got going on next week. That's all for today. Like I said, we're going to send out a follow-up email by the end of the week with links to the presentation slides and the recording, links to register for next week's webinars, and also, again, the link to the evaluation survey that I just put in the chat. So that info that we collect from that survey is very important to us. We use it to make improvements to these workshop experiences, and we also use the data to continue to get grant funding to do stuff like this. So please take a few minutes to complete that survey, and thank you for joining us. Don't forget to post your turnip activities on social media and use the hashtag Turnip the Volume. And we hope to see you next week.
Y'all feel free to